Recovered Anna obsesses over aristocracy, forcing Joseph to cross-dress as her at a royal ball. The Marquis, veiling his demonic nature behind gentleness, forcibly slips a sapphire ring onto Joseph's finger, exposing his awareness of the disguise. Blackmailed into marrying pregnant Charlotte, Joseph faces her seduction on their wedding night, interrupted by the steward. Summoned to the library under pretext of finding a book, Joseph's resistance crumbles under the Marquis's psychological domination. Anna's envy, Charlotte's schemes, and the Marquis's shadow demonic form ensnare Joseph in a sacrificial web. Chapter 6. After Anna recovered, she accompanied Marquis Wellington to banquets large and small, day in and day out. He even brought her to town to discuss estate matters with the nobleman. Everyone talked about Anna's beauty and firmly believed that Marquis Wellington had fallen completely in love with her. Everyone except Joseph. That evening's interaction left him feeling that Marquis Wellington was unfathomable. He was definitely not someone Anna could handle. Trusting him too much would lead to a terrible fall. Joseph hesitated, then warned Anna. Anna was pleased at first and comforted him, but later grew impatient. "Joseph," she said, "why do you always underestimate me? Do you think I'm unaware of anything? Marquis Wellington has hinted that he will marry me." Joseph stood up abruptly, his calf hitting the chair, the pain contorting his face. But he ignored the pain, staring at Anna in shock. "Really?" Anna smiled. "Yes, perhaps you'll hear the Marquis announce his intention to marry me tonight." "Joseph, aren't you happy for me?" Joseph shook his head. "I'm very happy for you." Anna's lifelong happiness was his greatest concern. If Marquis Wellington truly married Anna, he would certainly offer his most sincere blessings. However, amidst the joy, a shadow gradually spread in his heart. Joseph still felt that Marquis Wellington was unfathomable, and it frightened him. He didn't know why, but he had a vague feeling that a shadow was gradually approaching them, waiting for an opportunity to drag them into the abyss. This made him panic, a feeling that surfaced from time to time. The castle's black brick walls, the polished floors, the cold, ornate decorations, the perpetually quiet estate, and the withered, gloomy woods, all closed in like a demon, filling him with dread. Anna could no longer leave the estate, and Joseph couldn't abandon her. He had to. He had to see her truly happy before he could leave the estate with peace of mind. Anna hugged Joseph and left, content. Joseph remained stunned for a moment, then hid in his room reading. A long time later, he heard piano music. The melody was filled with sorrow, like a young girl's boundless melancholy under the moonlight. Joseph snapped back to reality, put down his book, and closed the window. Miss Sherlock was not someone he could approach. When night fell, the maid forgot to deliver dinner and water. The kitchen closed after dinner time. Joseph waited in vain for food, his stomach growling with hunger. He smiled wryly. He couldn't blame the maid. Who would remember him? With Anna gone, everyone assumed this was an empty room. Late at night, Joseph was so hungry he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, and finally, in desperation, he got up to find the butler, hoping to get a piece of bread, anything to fill his stomach. He carried a kerosene lamp and walked a long way. The long corridor was silent, and the portraits hanging on both sides looked particularly frightening. Joseph suddenly stopped and looked up at the portrait above him. A portrait of Marquis Wellington? It was his likeness, seemingly recently completed, looking very new. The Marquis in the painting seemed to be looking out at the world, gazing at everyone who passed by. His light gray eyes hid a dark world, where no secrets could be concealed. Joseph realized that no matter where he went, the Marquis in the painting was staring at him. Those light gray eyes were fixed on him, locking him in their gaze. Joseph panicked, lowered his head and hurried past. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he looked up and suddenly noticed the Marquis in the painting curve his lips into a smile. His heart leaped with fright. He trembled and examined it again, realizing it was an illusion caused by the lamplight. But he no longer had the courage to go back. Hunger was far more unbearable than fear. Joseph continued on. As he passed the staircase, he heard a terrible sobbing sound. A woman's cries, intermittent and terrifyingly choked. Joseph's scalp prickled with fear. He turned and tried to run, but the woman behind him called out to him first, "Is that Joseph?" "It's Charlotte." "Please don't go. Stay, help me please." She looked haggard, her face ashen. Joseph walked towards her, and Charlotte looked at him intently, then suddenly grabbed his wrist. "Joseph, please marry me." Joseph was startled and quickly tried to shake her off. "No, Charlotte, are you mad?" Charlotte covered her face and sobbed. "If you don't marry me, no one can save me. I will be killed secretly, because I have tarnished the Wellington family crest." Those words were too serious. Joseph couldn't help but ask, "What happened to you, Miss Charlotte?" It was absurd. If he hadn't had any affection for Charlotte, Joseph would have reprimanded her to her face. How could she be so reckless? To allow a man to touch her before marriage, resulting in pregnancy? Of course, Joseph didn't think Charlotte was promiscuous and deserved to die. He simply strongly disapproved of her lack of self-respect. He had seen many poor girls who had to become prostitutes on the streets to feed themselves. They gave birth at a young age, though their children usually didn't survive. Those situations were out of necessity. Charlotte, with her wealthy life and aristocratic status, had willingly degraded herself, which angered and dismayed Joseph. However, if her unmarried pregnancy became public, she would be subjected to endless gossip. Worse, she might die from the rumors, or be driven out of the estate by the enraged Marquis Wellington and stripped of her dowry. The fate of a woman without financial support was easily imagined. Joseph's devout faith in God made him disapprove of Charlotte's actions. But the kindness in his heart prevented him from ignoring a human life. That night, the image of the young girl under the moonlight, her elfin smile, lingered in Joseph's mind. Miss Charlotte, after all, was the same age as Anna. Finally, he made his decision. The thin man in front of him seemed to remember something, and he trembled with fear, even sobbing. "I married her, I married Miss Charlotte. But I discovered I can no longer leave. We've fallen into a web carefully woven by the devil, and the only path left is death." The priest's eyes widened in shock, staring at the beautiful man before him. Good heavens, what had he heard? He said he was Marquis Wellington's nephew-in-law? Good heavens, that sounded preposterous. Hadn't that nephew-in-law died of illness? Then who was the person before him? It was a good story. The priest thought coldly, but his face wore a look of understanding and pity. The bell rang and the priest looked towards the door. The gentleman he had seen the other day appeared, still dressed in simple black attire, a top hat, gloves, and a rosewood cane in his right hand. An undeniable gentleman, a gentleman with a kind and generous heart. Now he understood. The beautiful man before him was probably not mentally stable. The priest felt he should have realized it sooner. The beautiful man was always nervous and cowering, as if afraid of something following him. But the priest noticed that when the gentleman at the door appeared, the beautiful man, after trembling violently, became calm and no longer cowered. Perhaps he wasn't even aware of it himself. The priest watched the gentleman and Joseph leave, thinking that they would probably never come again. It was a pity. The story was good, and he wanted to hear the rest. Chapter 7. Joseph told Anna his decision while she was humming a tune and admiring the beautiful jewelry on her person. Upon hearing it, she immediately fell silent, her smile vanished, and she turned to glare at Joseph. "Joseph, we grew up together. You can't fool me." "Joseph, I have to marry Miss Charlotte." "Pity." Anna tossed the jewelry into a cabinet. "Are you going to gamble your entire marriage on pity?" "Joseph, I know you're kind, but I also know you're not foolishly kind, because of Julie." Julie was the daughter of a pastor in the small town of Hebrides. She loved Joseph and was good friends with him. She had become pregnant out of wedlock and begged Joseph for help. Joseph refused, and Julie was eventually discovered. The townspeople couldn't accept her, and the pastor threw her out. Julie later froze to death on the streets in winter. Anna glowered. "You still haven't forgotten that bitch?" "Joseph, Julie was innocent, Anna. If I had agreed to marry her, perhaps both she and her child would have survived. He had always regretted this. That's why he agreed to help Charlotte. Anna sneered, innocent? Only starving poor girls and whores open their legs for men's pleasure. She, a pastor's daughter, degraded herself and didn't cherish herself. Only a fool like you would pity her. You mentioned Charlotte? Oh, that's a lying bitch. Don't think I don't know the look of envy she gives me. She was supposed to be the Marquis's daughter, with a large dowry and a happy marriage. In reality, she's just a dependent orphan, without even a new dress to wear to the ball. And me, us, Joseph, we, these poor relatives from afar, have taken her place and her fortune. She only hates us. Only you, Joseph, only you believe her words. Joseph, Anna, what you think is too absolute. It wasn't just because of Julie, but also because Charlotte was about the same age as Anna. This era was unkind to girls, even harsh. Joseph always softened because of this. I just think, if I'm good to everyone, then one day, when my dearest Anna encounters difficulties, someone will be willing to help her. Hearing this, Anna, who had been bristling with sharp thorns, instantly calmed down. She went over and hugged Joseph. Thank you, Joseph, but there's no need. Don't marry Charlotte. She's not as harmless as she seems. Joseph remained silent, not answering directly. A thoughtful look flashed in Anna's downcast eyes. In short, she couldn't agree to Joseph marrying that woman, Charlotte. However, after several days of stalemate, Anna finally agreed. Because the Marquis of Wellington had consented to their marriage and stated that he would personally attend their wedding and bestow an additional dowry of £10,000. Upon hearing this news, everyone praised the Marquis of Wellington's generosity and expressed envy towards Charlotte and that distant nephew, Joseph. Anna was in a very bad mood. She had gone to protest to the Marquis of Wellington, but in the end, she could only compromise. Because of Charlotte's pregnancy, which she claimed was Joseph's child. And Joseph didn't deny it. Anna was furious and ignored Joseph for many days. Joseph begged for her forgiveness and blessing, constantly trying to appease her. Until a few days before the wedding, Wellington was to take Anna to London for a royal banquet. At the same time, he would announce the wedding date. Wellington's and Anna's wedding date. Joseph was shocked. The Marquis is willing to marry you? He agreed to marry you? My God, Anna, tell me, am I dreaming? Is this real? My dear, I'm so happy for you. He seemed even happier than Anna, the person involved. Anna hugged Joseph back and finally gave him a smile. I hope you'll be happy too. Joseph whispered, you'll be happier than me, and that's enough for me. The next evening, the carriage was ready. Anna, however, fell ill again. Her cheeks were flushed, she coughed incessantly, and her throat was hoarse beyond recognition. But she still insisted on sitting up and putting on her dress. Joseph held her hand. Tell the Marquis, let him call a doctor to see you. You can't go out now. Stay and rest. Anna shook her head. No, absolutely not. Don't tell the Marquis, don't let him know. I know I'm too sick to walk, even too sick to attend the ball. So, Joseph, you go in my place. Her sharp gaze stared directly at Joseph, no longer with the initial pleading and unfamiliarity, but with dominance and familiarity. You want to see me happy, right? You want me to be joyful, right? You want me to bless you and Miss Charlotte, right? Anna asked softly, again and again, relentlessly poking at the softest and most guilt-ridden part of Joseph's heart. Don't make me feel like you've abandoned me. Joseph, do you want to see me sick begging you? Joseph, I will never refuse you. Anna gave a sweet smile. This time, the dress was a silk white gown, soft and beautiful, as if woven from captured moonlight. The hem was adorned with pearls, and silver thread embroidered exquisite patterns. Pearl jewelry and rings, white silk gloves, a gorgeous lady's hat. The front of the hat was veiled with netting, covering the part above the nose, adding a touch of hazy beauty. After Joseph put on the dress, he felt as if every detail was tailor-made for him. It fit perfectly. But there were still differences between him and Anna. This thought flashed through his mind, but the strangeness didn't linger. Joseph still felt uncomfortable. He tugged at the hem of the dress and looked up at Anna. He was surprised to find Anna's face gloomy and very unpleasant. "Anna?" Anna came back to her senses. "It looks very fitting." Joseph looked down. "Yes, I am taller than you." The hem reached his ankles, covering his toes. If it were Anna, the hem should have trailed on the ground, but perhaps this was the style of ladies' dresses now. "Anna, bless you. I hope all misfortune stays away from you." "Joseph, I hope the same for you." Joseph hurried downstairs, holding up his skirt. 2 carriages were parked in front of the manor. He was surprised to find Charlotte there too. He hesitated for a moment, wanting to go to Charlotte's carriage. But the butler appeared and stopped him. "You will ride in the same carriage as the master." Joseph subconsciously turned his head and saw the Marquis of Wellington standing beside the first carriage. He couldn't help but feel nervous, a strange sense of fear rising within him. The butler behind him urged him to hurry over, while the man in front extended his hand. Joseph had no choice but to go over and extend his own hand. Both wore gloves, their skin not touching. Not feeling the cold temperature, Joseph breathed a sigh of relief. The icy temperature left when their hands clasped that night had made Joseph dream of being entwined by black snakes when he returned. The Marquis of Wellington looked down. "You look beautiful in white, just as I imagined. Pure, innocent, beautiful, pitiful." Pitiful? Joseph was stunned for a moment. He felt that this adjective might be misused. He looked up at the Marquis, only seeing a delicate profile. Perhaps it was just a casual compliment. It was nothing strange. Many gentlemen used the same clichés to praise ladies. Joseph moved his right hand, unable to pull it back. He then realized that from the moment he got into the carriage, his right hand had been held in the Marquis's hand. Did Anna and the Marquis usually act so intimately? This was really embarrassing. The Marquis of Wellington turned his head. "What is it?" They were so close that when the Marquis turned his head, they almost kissed. Joseph looked directly into the Marquis of Wellington's light gray eyes, almost lost in that hazy mist, and subconsciously thought of barren woods and the sky. Cold, empty, desolate, and imprisoning. Once trapped, there would be no escape. Joseph's heart pounded violently, his breath almost stopping. He felt terrified. The Marquis was terrifying. Stepping back slightly, Joseph averted his gaze. "Nothing, my lord." The Marquis of Wellington's gaze suddenly deepened, staring intently at Joseph. Joseph's scalp tightened. "Did I say something wrong?" The Marquis of Wellington suddenly smiled. "I told you, you can call me Lance." Joseph froze. "What?" The Marquis of Wellington reached out and tucked the soft golden hair by his ear behind his ear, whispering, "Lance, my Christian name." Joseph blushed immediately, somewhat at a loss. My God, his Christian name, that was a name only shared in the most intimate relationships. He knew what Anna should have known, and it gave him a guilty feeling of theft. Just as Joseph was lost in thought, he suddenly noticed the Marquis of Wellington approaching. He leaned back in fright, but the man's hand, which had been playing with his hair, moved to his shoulder, holding him in place at his shoulder and neck, making him unable to move. He watched helplessly as that incredibly handsome face drew closer, lips against lips, intimately close. Joseph, who had never been so close to anyone, was stunned by such a kiss, full of entwined tongues and possessive intent. The strange man's scent enveloped him, the powerful sense of oppression leaving him no room to resist. His eyes moistened as he let himself be bullied. It was just a kiss, but it made Joseph feel as if he had been invaded, inside and out, deep into his soul. The Marquis of Wellington chuckled softly. "This time, why didn't you respond?" Joseph's whole body stiffened. Respond? No, he wouldn't. Wait, would he be exposed? The Marquis of Wellington caressed his red lips and leaned down to cover them again. And Joseph, his arms wrapped around the broad shoulders of the man on top of him, struggled to respond, with difficulty, his eyes wet. emerald green eyes covered with a layer of moisture, like an invitation, full of temptation. The Marquis of Wellington kissed those beautiful eyes. Just as I thought. Sweet. Chapter 8. The banquet hall was filled with the fragrance of perfumes and the shimmer of elegant attire. Nobles and beautiful ladies whispered and laughed, music rising and falling. Servants and maids weaved through the crowd, while the queen, after a brief appearance of only a few minutes, departed, leaving the princess and her husband seated at the head table. While the queen, after a brief appearance of only a few minutes, departed, leaving the princess and her husband seated at the head table. The Marquis of Wellington sat with the princess and prince, murmuring in what seemed a pleasant conversation. Joseph and Charlotte were left behind, the latter's awkward position precluding her from joining the festivities. Joseph, fearing discovery, remained by Charlotte's side. He glanced at her profile, but she offered him no acknowledgement. This felt strange. Whenever he appeared before her, Charlotte would always gaze at him. Those beautiful eyes would be filled with tender affection, as if the person she gazed upon was her beloved. However, love, or the lack thereof, is discernible. Even the most affectionate gaze can only deceive oneself. Charlotte's gaze was just like the looks Joseph had seen from gentlemen in the Hebrides, toying with poor girls, affectionate yet false. Lost in thought, Joseph suddenly heard Charlotte say, "He's very handsome, isn't he?" "What?" Joseph lowered his voice. "Are you speaking to me?" Charlotte turned, her face laced with mockery. "The Marquis of Wellington is very handsome, isn't he? Like a demon, changing into a beautiful face, skilled in lies and deception. He weaves lies with masterful rhetoric, enticing vulnerable humans to lose their reason, drawing out the greed deep within their hearts, ultimately leading them to their downfall." To compare a gentleman to a terrifying demon showed the extent of her loathing. The Marquis is generous. Joseph, ultimately afraid of the Marquis of Wellington, couldn't bring himself to say the word kind. At this moment, Joseph also questioned himself, why did he fear the Marquis of Wellington specifically? It seemed unfair. The Marquis of Wellington hadn't driven him and Anna away, but instead had given them shelter. He had even agreed to marry Anna and allow Charlotte to marry him. Conversely, he and Anna had been deceiving the Marquis. In truth, the Marquis of Wellington should be a generous and kind gentleman. However, Joseph couldn't apply the word kind to the Marquis. He felt an irrepressible sense that describing the Marquis of Wellington as kind would be absurd. Thus, Joseph believed he was prejudiced against the Marquis. He felt guilty. Charlotte suddenly turned, staring at Joseph. "Do you know Agar's?" Joseph froze. Charlotte whispered, "The one who leads people to sin, unravels worldly mysteries, and speaks lies mixed with truth." Agar's, one of the 72 demons of Solomon. An enemy of the Lord, a demon adept at leading people into sin. Joseph abruptly stepped back. "No, I don't know." Charlotte laughed, turned, and disappeared into the crowd. Joseph remained, pondering Charlotte's words. The Marquis of Wellington appeared behind him unnoticed, bending down to take Joseph's hand from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Joseph startled, and as he moved, he found himself held in the Marquis's embrace. He was deeply uncomfortable, trembling involuntarily. And nothing. The Marquis of Wellington looked down at his trembling form. "Let's go." "Where?" The Marquis didn't answer, leading him by the hand to see the Queen. The Queen was behind a curtain. They could only see her silhouette. The Marquis of Wellington's purpose was simply to announce his wedding to Anna to the Queen. The Queen agreed and gave her blessing. Then, the Marquis led him to the head table of the court ball, where the princess and prince announced their wedding. Next, the Marquis kissed Joseph, placing the green emerald engagement ring on his finger. Everyone, whether sincere or not, smiled their congratulations. Joseph removed his left glove, the magnificent emerald ring on his ring finger. He had a fleeting vision of countless thorns sprouting from the emerald, growing relentlessly, killing everyone, their blood watering the thorns, which then bloomed into vibrant roses. The thorns intertwined, forming an impenetrable cage, trapping him within. Joseph trembled with fear, but no one noticed. Even if they had, they would have assumed he was overwhelmed with joy. After all, a poor girl from the Hebrides marrying a fabulously wealthy marquis was incredibly fortunate. Being overwhelmed with joy was perfectly normal. The Marquis of Wellington embraced Joseph, kissing his cheek. "My fiancée, ma rose." Joseph's body stiffened. He suddenly felt that if Anna were here, she would have played the part perfectly. It wasn't right, he shouldn't be standing here. Anna was more capable than him. If she were a boy, their grandfather would have undoubtedly left his estate to her, proud of her. Next, the Marquis of Wellington introduced Joseph to numerous people. Joseph's role was to smile and nod, his cheeks aching and stiff from the effort. Later, when he could finally stop smiling, he stared down at the intricate carpet, lost in thought. A gentleman from London, the Duke of Baimon, monopolized the Marquis of Wellington for the remainder of the ball, talking incessantly, trying to persuade the Marquis to invest in his slave trade on the new shipping routes. The Marquis only responded occasionally, but it was enough to encourage the Duke of Baymon's enthusiastic discourse. The Duke of Baimon continued. "Those dark-skinned inferiors, although carrying filthy and dreadful diseases, are undeniably useful. For example, the development of the New World, where a group of uncivilized red-skinned monsters live. We can have these dark-skinned inferior slaves develop the New World, drive out those uncivilized savages, and finally have them mine gold, earning us an endless stream of gold. I dare say, this is an absolutely profitable venture." He gesticulated excitedly, as if already seeing piles of gold being shipped to London by boat, filling his ducal mansion. Joseph felt a sense of disgust and frowned silently. The Marquis of Wellington noticed his displeasure and said to the Duke of Baimon, "Excuse me, my fiancée isn't feeling well. She needs to rest. I'm not particularly interested in the slave trade, but as I understand it, many people are beginning to petition against it." The Duke of Baimon scoffed. Just a rebellion of slaves. Can you imagine lambs rebelling against the natural order, refusing to be food for wolves?" The Marquis of Wellington smiled faintly and said softly, "But those slaves, they are human." With that, he led Joseph away. The Duke of Baymon's face darkened as he glared at the departing Marquis of Wellington and his fiancée. As Joseph looked back, he saw Charlotte standing behind the Duke of Baimon, though he couldn't see much more. The Marquis of Wellington led him into the carriage and pressed him down onto the soft velvet cushions, kissing and caressing him deeply. He murmured in Joseph's ear, "I've wanted to kiss you and touch you since earlier. You are so beautiful, constantly attracting me." Joseph watched in horror as his clothes were removed. He pushed against the Marquis with all his might, terrified. "No, please, we aren't married yet." "That makes no difference. It was merely a matter of time." But Joseph was still frightened to tears, pushing him away forcefully, scrambling to huddle in the corner of the carriage, burying his head in his arms, his whole body trembling and rejecting his advances. The Marquis of Wellington remained in the shadows, watching Joseph without approaching further. He lightly brushed his index finger across his lips, a smile playing on his lips. It was as if Joseph's fear pleased him. In the darkness, the demon was delighted. Chapter 9. The Marquis of Wellington gently brushed the hair away from Joseph's cheek. "If you don't like it, I won't touch you." "After the wedding," Joseph replied. Joseph remained stiff, but the Marquis's grip was too strong, holding him firmly. He couldn't escape to the corner of the carriage. Any attempt to flee resulted in being pulled closer into the Marquis's embrace. So, Joseph dared not move. The Marquis of Wellington rested his chin on Joseph's head, his left arm around him, patting him gently. "You seem reluctant to be near me tonight." Upon hearing this, Joseph became even more fearful, completely abandoning the idea of escaping the Marquis's embrace, and obediently nestled against him. The Marquis kissed Joseph's temple. "Good boy." Although the Marquis had been gentle throughout, never raising his voice, Joseph was terrified. He consoled himself, thinking it was perhaps due to nervousness and discomfort. After all, the object of the Marquis's affections should be Anna. Only he was the anomaly. Constantly worried about being exposed, hence the fear and anxiety. Relax, just relax. The Marquis wouldn't recognize him, no one would, not even Charlotte. Charlotte! Joseph clutched the Marquis's clothes, looking up at him. Miss Charlotte, she's still at the ball. We should wait for her. The Marquis, his right hand gripping his cane, gazed ahead. Hearing this, he lowered his head, his pale gray eyes locking onto Joseph's. No need. Someone will escort her back. I suspect she wouldn't want to accompany us. Joseph hesitated for a long time, then cautiously asked, Does she have a misunderstanding about you and about you and me? After a moment of silence, the Marquis said, She's always believed that I killed her father, stole the Wellington family fortune, and reduced her to her current miserable circumstances. Miserable? Then she probably hadn't seen what hell truly looked like. Joseph remained silent. He had heard about the previous Marquis of Wellington's cause of death, said to have frequented high-class establishments, contracted a love sickness, and died in the bed of a prostitute. It wasn't a glorious end. Joseph's father, upon hearing the news, had celebrated with so much alcohol that he drank himself to death. Therefore, Joseph remembered the previous Marquis's demise even more clearly. Joseph softly said, Miss Charlotte holds a prejudice against you, but she'll understand your innocence in time. Then he distinctly heard the Marquis of Wellington's disdainful snort from above. The Marquis, I don't need her understanding, and she won't relinquish her so-called prejudice. Because some people need to hate others to survive, using it to remember the glory they once possessed. Joseph was stunned. What? The Marquis pinched Joseph's chin, lifting it, and looked directly at him. Everyone has a support to live, what people call a goal or a desire. Unfortunately, most are dirty and ugly, sickening to look at for too long. He placed his cane aside and traced Joseph's features. The remaining few have pure, clean goals or love, affection. They appear beautiful and, of course, taste even more delicious. They belong to Jehovah, to heaven. The pure ones won't descend to filthy places. He said regretfully, 1 in a million treasures. Joseph didn't understand his words, instinctively feeling fear and trembling. The Marquis patted Joseph's shoulder intermittently, leaning back against the carriage and closing his eyes to rest. The carriage wheels rattled over the cobblestones, through the woods and forest paths, finally arriving at the country estate outside the city just before dawn. This estate originally belonged to a viscount who lived in London, but he'd invested heavily in factories and gone bankrupt. The estate was auctioned and purchased by the Marquis of Wellington. Simon, the butler, was already waiting at the door. The Marquis of Wellington exited the carriage first, then wrapped his arms around Joseph's slender waist, lifting him down. As soon as Joseph's feet touched the ground, the arms around him loosened, the warmth of the embrace fleeting. Joseph looked up and saw the Marquis of Wellington's back. He was instructing Simon, the butler, his voice too low for Joseph to hear. Joseph stood there, lost in thought, when the Marquis turned, extending his hand. Come. Joseph walked over, placing his hand in the Marquis's, enveloped by the larger hand. The Marquis, leaning on his cane, led him into the castle. Joseph suddenly glanced towards the corner of the castle, at the tower window. It was empty, no one there. But the window was open. The Marquis of Wellington escorted him to the door. Go in. Joseph's lips moved. He thought for a moment, but remained silent, nodding and turning to enter the room. As he closed the door, he peered through the crack at the Marquis in front of him. The morning light stretched his shadow long. In the vast expanse of morning light, there was only this single shadow, as if it were the only darkness within the light. Joseph turned around and jumped, startled by Anna's silent appearance behind him. They had traveled from the Wellington estate to London for the Queen's ball. The continuous days of travel had made Anna ill, And now, the sickly Anna was pale, her expression cold, her eyes terrifying. "Joseph, Anna, go back to bed quickly, don't catch a chill." He hurried to help Anna back into bed, saying dejectedly, "You've been ill ever since we left Hebrides. Maybe we shouldn't have left. I can't stay in that impoverished place my whole life." Anna suddenly interrupted Joseph. Joseph's lips moved. He softly said, "All right, I won't say anything that upsets you again." Anna hugged Joseph, clinging to his waist as she had when she was a child and felt wronged. Joseph patted her shoulder. "I'm here with you. Sleep now. Get better soon." After Anna fell asleep, Joseph went to close the window. He suddenly realized that from this angle, he could see the entrance to the estate. He paused, then dismissed it as a coincidence, closing the window. Walking back, he bumped into the dress hanging on the clothes rack, knocking it askew. While straightening the dress, Joseph noticed specks of mud on the lining of the hem. That kind of mud would only get there if the outer skirt had been lifted and someone had walked a long distance on a muddy path. This was Anna's dress. But Anna was bedridden, unable to walk. Joseph looked at the sleeping Anna, then put the dress down, pretending to have seen nothing. He sat on the edge of the bed, gazing at Anna's sleeping face. Anna was beautiful, from her delicate features and emerald green eyes to her golden hair. Joseph couldn't imagine a more beautiful girl than Anna. She was grown now and ambitious. Joseph had always known that Anna wasn't content to remain in the Hebrides for the rest of her life. She had noble blood, a striking appearance. She shouldn't spend her life doing housework and milking cows like the other women in town. Their grandfather was proud of Anna, countless times painting a picture of the Wellington family's splendor for her. Their grandmother also loved Anna's intelligence, telling her that if she had been born in France, she would certainly have been a beautiful countess. If it was what Anna wanted, then he would never refuse her. This was what he owed her. Chapter 10. Joseph kept a close eye on Anna and noticed that she was able to get out of bed after just 2 days of rest. Even a common fever can kill a strong man, but Anna recovered within 2 or 3 days after 2 fevers. This seemed to foreshadow something, but Joseph chose to remain silent and not question Anna. When he realized that Anna was deceiving him, many things became apparent. For example, Anna often went out, but most of the time she was not with the Marquis, but went out alone. For example, at the ball, she was like a queen at the ball, attracting everyone's attention, while the Marquis was alone in the corner admiring his fiancée. Another example is that Anna was unexpectedly familiar with the Duke of Baiman. Joseph stopped going out, and Anna was even less willing for him to dress as a woman to impersonate her. He hid in his room to read or accompany Charlotte. Their wedding was soon held, but it was not grand, and there was not even a ball. A few lonely people and a priest. They found a random church and completed the wedding. The Marquis of Wellington did not even show up, only the butler Simon was present, saying, "Premarital pregnancy is disgraceful, so it is better to be quiet, I hope you don't mind." Joseph looked at Charlotte, whose lips were tightly pursed, her eyes filled with anger. Joseph quickly turned his head and said to the butler Simon, "No, I don't mind." After the wedding, Joseph helped Charlotte back to the room. The two were alone in the room, which was naturally awkward. Charlotte changed into a cotton robe and pajamas, walked over with a charming smile, and climbed onto Joseph's chest, attaching her red lips. She said, "Don't you want to do something to me?" Joseph's breathing quickened, he grabbed Charlotte's wrist, his face flushed red, and he seemed to be trying hard to restrain himself. Charlotte smiled triumphantly, her smile even more charming. Her appearance was not particularly beautiful, but it seemed that any woman, once she set her mind to it, would exude a special charm that made people blush. She pulled Joseph's hand and pressed it against her breast. Joseph's pupils constricted, and just as he couldn't help himself, there was a knock on the door. He quickly said, "I'll go open the door." He let go of Charlotte and left hurriedly. Joseph opened the door, and outside was the butler Simon with a lamp. Simon asked expressionlessly, "Sir, have you seen the book that the master left in the study?" The one with the black cover, it looks very old in Arabic. Joseph thought for a while and shook his head. I haven't seen it. Simon brooked no argument. The master is looking for that book, and he will be furious if he can't find it. In the past 3 days only you have been in the study. Please go find it, okay? Joseph hesitated. Then, please wait a moment. He turned around and explained to Charlotte. Charlotte was so angry that her chest was heaving up and down, and she was hysterical. Is he retaliating against me? Today is my wedding day, and you are my husband. It's fine if he doesn't come. Why does he have to call you away? He's retaliating against me, laughing at me. Joseph was stunned. Charlotte. Charlotte gradually calmed down, glared at Joseph, and suddenly turned her back. Let's go. Joseph. Charlotte. Charlotte. Go. She sneered. If you're late, mister, Marquis will be angry with you. Joseph. I'll be back early. You don't have to wait for me. Go to sleep first. He went out, closed the door, and followed the butler Simon to the study. After walking 4 or 5 meters, Joseph turned back and looked at the closed door. If Simon had come a step late, he might have pushed Charlotte to the ground because of his violent reaction. She was still pregnant, and if she accidentally fell, it might have irreparable consequences. Under Joseph's calm surface, fear and disgust overwhelmed him like a tide. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes stared straight ahead, as if closing his eyes would make him see bright red blood flowing from the white thigh. The girl's silent tears, her eyes empty and cold, only a bottomless despair. The man's disgusting panting, the stench coming towards him. The old woman's madness, stumbling forward, falling down, rolling down the stairs, blood splattering everywhere. Devil! A seductive devil. Burned to death, as soon as it appears, it will bring blood and take away life. It is sin, devil, the punishment of the Lord, so burn to death. Although he was walking, the world was spinning, he couldn't see the way forward, nor could he find the way back. The walls twisted, forming huge vortices, rushing towards him. Chaotic sounds, tumbling, screaming, shouting, killing each other, scrambling to get in front of him, accusing him, scolding him. Joseph suddenly raised his hand to support the wall and bent over to vomit. In fact, nothing came out, but he couldn't help but feel nauseous and vomit. A cane suddenly appeared in front of him, followed by a pair of feet stopping. Looking up along the hem of the clothes, it was the Marquis of Wellington. He was looking down at him, seeing his embarrassed appearance. His eyebrows did not move at all. The light gray eyes were extremely deep, and it was impossible to see any trace of emotion. The Marquis suddenly leaned over and wiped Joseph's face with his hand, crying. Joseph was stunned and touched his cheek, which was wet. Unconsciously, tears flowed down. This was not intentional. It was probably because he remembered those unpleasant pasts and subconsciously shed tears. Joseph wiped away his tears, looked up at the Marquis, took a step back, and leaned against the wall. Your Excellency. The Marquis pushed open the door. Come in. Joseph followed. This is the study, with thousands of books on all sides, dazzling the eyes. Joseph spoke first. I haven't seen the book you mentioned. The Marquis glanced at him. Only you have been here. Joseph frowned. I didn't take it. Do you suspect me? The Marquis tapped the ground with his cane, suggesting that he calm down and not be too excited. Maybe you just got married and are emotionally excited, but I won't understand you. Don't get angry with me. Don't forget that under these circumstances, if I want to, I can even tell the sheriff. Theft is a serious crime and will be hanged. Joseph pursed his lips, feeling wronged when threatened. He lowered his head and turned his face away from the Marquis. The Marquis put his cane aside and took off his top hat and coat. At this time, Joseph realized that he was wearing his going-out clothes. Could it be that he didn't attend his wedding with Charlotte today because he went out? The Marquis sat down without speaking. After Joseph calmed down, he turned around to look for the book he mentioned. Behind him, the Marquis stared at him quietly. Joseph felt like a thorn in his back, so he turned around and came to the Marquis and asked, You said you would marry Anna. Is it going to be a wedding like me and Charlotte today? The Marquis chuckled. My coat is hanging on the coat rack. Go over and find a small box in the pocket of the coat. Joseph hesitated to go over and found a small box in the pocket of the coat. Marquis, open it. Joseph opened the box, and a quaint and exquisite sapphire ring was quietly lying in the box, emitting a gentle and dazzling light. He looked up at the Marquis, who said, It's a complete set of jewelry. The main jewelry of the Wellington family has been passed down from generation to generation, and it is stored elsewhere. I went to pick it up today. The others have been put away, leaving this ring. What do you think? Joseph answered honestly, It's very beautiful. Marquis, it can adjust the size, so every Marquis of Wellington can wear it. Joseph was surprised. It's really delicate. The Marquis suddenly said, Is your hand the same size as Anna's? Joseph looked up. No. His hand is bigger than Anna's. Marquis, it's almost the same. He stood up, walked towards Joseph, took the ring from his hand, and grabbed Joseph's hand. Try it on Anna, adjust the size. Joseph looked at the ring gradually approaching the ring finger, and suddenly retracted. I think it's better for Anna to come in person. The Marquis grabbed that hand without explanation, looked up at Joseph. Shush, quiet. That glance was exceptionally cold, with an undeniable authority, scaring Joseph, who dared not move again. The Marquis was satisfied, his lips curving into a smile. Good boy.